tariff threats coming from Donald Trump today, this time for Canadian aircraft.
Canada has certified 2 American-built aircraft that U.S. President Donald Trump alleged were being held back improperly by the agency.
President Trump threatened a 50% tariff on Canadian aircraft imports and to decertify planes made by Bombardier for use in the U.S. Now,
a threat was issued, 50%, on aircraft. But instead of hesitation, there was movement. Canada made a decision that could quietly reshape the aerospace balance between Ottawa and Washington. Despite a direct warning from U.S. President Donald Trump to impose a sweeping 50% tariff on certain aircraft, Canadian regulators moved forward. Not with retaliation, not with escalation, but with certification. So the question now is simple. Who really controls the skies in a trade war? Stay with us, because the answer is more complicated than it appears. At the center of this unfolding development are 3 key actors. First, Transport Canada, the country's federal aviation regulator. It is the authority responsible for certifying aircraft for operation under Canadian law. Second, Donald Trump, who last month warned of a potential 50% tariff and even floated the idea of decertifying certain Canadian aircraft entering U.S. airspace. And third, the aerospace manufacturers caught in the middle, including Gulfstream, owned by General Dynamics, and Canadian rival Bombardier, whose global series competes directly in the ultra-long-range business jet market.
Would it make sense for the U.S. to stop bringing in aircraft from Canada? What would that impact look like?
Oh, the question you have to ask yourself, for the U.S. to kind of back off what they've done in this latest mess. There's still a 50% tariff that is hanging over Bombardier airplanes. That would be a death knell, from in my opinion, to Bombardier. It would be something that would price their airplanes out of the market completely, and yet open the door for Gulfstream to recapture some of its lost market share.
But the story goes deeper. Bombardier employs approximately 3,000 workers across 9 U.S. facilities and relies on nearly 2,800 American suppliers. Its aircraft typically contain at least 40% U.S.-sourced components. That means any punitive tariff does not just affect Canada, it reverberates across American supply chains as well. This is not a simple two-country standoff. It is a deeply integrated industry, and every move has consequences on both sides of the border. On Monday, Transport Canada officially certified the latest Gulfstream business jet models, including the G700 and G800. This approval came less than a month after Trump publicly threatened to impose a 50% tariff on certain aircraft over certification disputes and broader trade tensions. The certification means these aircraft are now legally cleared for operation under Canadian regulatory standards. However, there is an additional layer. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration has granted conditional certification to the same models, citing the need for further testing related to potential de-icing issues in fuel systems.
The federal government, the Liberal Party, can pick up the phone, put a bit of pressure on somebody, and get something done, like this. Trump, as usual, with his sort of bull in a china shop routine, he's exposed just how thin the veneer is of these institutions. That it's not real. When they say stupid things like the certification process, Transport Canada is completely independent. We don't do that. No, that's bollocks, because you've just done it. I just want to sort of really emphasize that so much of this is fake. It's just it's a complete fraud. And they will say things repeatedly about the independence of institutions, and we just know it's not true. Here's Exhibit A.
The manufacturer has until the end of the year to demonstrate full compliance under probable icing conditions. That technical detail matters, because in aviation, certification is traditionally a regulatory process, not a political instrument, and that is where the tension becomes more subtle. Is this about safety, or leverage, or something else entirely? The timing is not accidental. Trump's tariff threat surfaced in late January, delivered through public statements and social media messaging. The warning included the possibility of decertifying aircraft entering U.S. markets, a move that experts quickly questioned, since certification authority legally rests with regulators like the FAA, not the White House. Now, just weeks later, Canada has acted, not in response, not with counter-tariffs, but by continuing its regulatory process as scheduled. This creates an important dynamic. Instead of reacting to political pressure, Canada maintained procedural continuity. In trade disputes, timing often signals strength more than rhetoric. And by moving forward without delay, Ottawa may be signaling something deliberate. But what exactly is that signal? This issue stretches far beyond Ottawa and Washington. Canada remains one of the world's leading aerospace manufacturers. Aircraft built in Canada include Bombardier business jets, de Havilland Twin Otters, Airbus A220 single-aisle aircraft, and helicopters produced by Bell Textron. Meanwhile, the United States enjoys a significant aerospace trade surplus with Canada, meaning it exports more in aerospace goods than it imports. That fact complicates the usual trade imbalance narrative often used to justify tariffs. More than 5,400 Canadian-made aircraft and helicopters are currently registered in the United States. Any sweeping tariff or decertification effort would not simply impact new aircraft. It would ripple across airlines, operators, maintenance providers, and cross-border commercial traffic. In aerospace, borders are economic lines, not production lines, and that makes escalation riskier than it sounds. So why move forward now? Because aviation certification is traditionally grounded in safety compliance, engineering validation, and documented standards, not political negotiation. Historically, aircraft groundings occur only after safety crises. A notable example was the Boeing 737 MAX grounding in 2019, when regulators worldwide suspended operations following 2 fatal crashes that claimed 346 lives. That precedent established a global norm: safety decisions must remain insulated from political influence. By certifying these aircraft despite tariff threats, Canada reinforces that principle. It also shifts the narrative. If tariffs are imposed after certification approval, the action becomes clearly economic, not safety-based. And that distinction matters in trade disputes before international bodies. There is also economic logic. A blow to Bombardier would also impact US suppliers embedded in its production chain. Tariffs rarely operate in isolation. They trigger supply chain friction, cost increases, and potential delivery delays. In other words, Canada's move may not be defiance. It may be positioning the dispute as economic, not regulatory. But here's where the story takes another turn. Because if certification proceeds and tariffs follow, the burden may not fall where many expect. Business jet buyers are often multinational corporations, charter operators, and global firms. Increased costs do not remain contained, they flow downstream. So the real question becomes, if a 50% tariff is imposed, who ultimately absorbs it? The manufacturer, the buyer, or the broader North American supply chain?
Actually certified, according to these documents, as of February 15th. This follows a rant on Truth Social by U.S. President Donald Trump last month, where he accused Canada of illegally refusing to certify a number of Gulfstream models. Gulfstream, of course, as you mentioned, a direct competitor to Bombardier, but it's unclear whether that had any sort of part in the reason for the delay. We do know that Transport Canada is still reviewing the Gulfstream G700 and G800 models.
The answer could reshape how future trade disputes are structured, and that's why this decision is bigger than a single aircraft model. The next phase depends on execution. If the United States proceeds with a 50% tariff, legal and trade mechanisms could activate quickly. Aerospace agreements under existing trade frameworks may be tested. If no tariff is imposed, the episode may quietly fade into the background, another example of rhetorical escalation followed by procedural normalcy. But if tariffs materialize, it could signal a broader shift towards sector-specific trade pressure in highly integrated industries. Aerospace is not steel. It is not aluminum. It is a precision supply chain built on decades of cross-border integration, and once friction enters that system, it does not exit easily. So what does this moment represent? It is not dramatic. There were no emergency announcements, no immediate retaliation. Instead, there was paperwork, certification, continuity. And sometimes, in trade disputes, that is the louder signal. Canada moved forward despite a 50% aircraft tariff threat, not with confrontation, but with procedure. The broader question now is whether political pressure will transform into economic action, or whether this episode becomes a case study in how regulatory systems quietly withstand political turbulence.